The announcement from Admiral Karen and the progenitor fleet reverberated through the halls of the Galactic Council, shaking the very foundations of the interstellar order that had stood for millennia. Ambassadors from the various member species frantically convened, their normally composed demeanors replaced by growing panic. "This cannot be happening," the Xener representative, Gthul, said, his towering insectoid form trembling. Humanity was supposed to be isolated, their technologies primitive. How can they possess such formidable ships and weaponry? Beside him, the Astrin matriarch, Lyrassa, narrowed her luminous eyes. "We have grown complacent, resting on the laurels of our technological superiority. We assumed the humans would remain forever beneath our notice." She turned to the assembled delegates. Now they have returned, and they seem intent on taking their place as the dominant power in the galaxy. The debate raged on, with some advocating for immediate retaliation, while others called for cautious diplomacy. Amid the chaos, a single voice rose above the din, that of the venerable Gracier, the oldest and most respected member of the Galactic Council. "Silence," the ancient Gracier commanded, his withered form commanding the attention of all present. "This is a moment of great consequence, one that will test the very foundations of our civilization. We must act with wisdom and foresight, not blind fury." The Gracier turned his milky eyes towards the projection of the progenitor fleet, its sleek vessels gleaming with an otherworldly power. "Humanity has returned to us, bearing the scars of a distant past. We must understand their motives, their grievances, before we can hope to find a peaceful resolution." Gthul, the Xener representative, scoffed. "Peaceful resolution? They have issued an ultimatum. Surrender or be destroyed. There is no room for diplomacy here." The Gracier raised a bony hand, silencing the dissenting voices. "And yet we must try. For if we fail, the consequences will be dire beyond measure." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates. "I propose we send an envoy, one who can reach the heart of this conflict and discern the true nature of humanity's return." Lyrassa, the Astrin matriarch, nodded slowly. "A wise suggestion. But who among us is worthy of such a delicate and dangerous mission?" The Gracier's lips curled into a faint smile. "I have someone in mind. A seasoned diplomat with a keen understanding of humanity's history and psyche. One who may yet find a path to peace, even in the face of such dire circumstances." The Galactic Council fell silent, their collective gaze turning towards the Gracier, waiting with bated breath to hear the name of the envoy who would dare to confront the might of the progenitor fleet. Aboard the flagship of the progenitor fleet, Admiral Karen stood at the bridge, his weathered features set in a mask of grim determination. Decades of service had honed his tactical acumen, and he knew that the time for diplomacy had passed. The galaxy had turned its back on humanity's rightful place, and now they would pay the price. "Status report," Karen barked, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "All fleets are in position, Admiral," reported the young officer at the helm. "Our weapons are charged and ready to fire on your command." Karen's jaw tightened. "Good. Begin the bombardment of the nearest Galactic Council outposts. Let them feel the fury of our return." The officer hesitated, his brow furrowed. "Admiral, are you certain we should not attempt further negotiations? Perhaps there is still a chance for—" Karen's piercing gaze silenced the young officer mid-sentence. "Negotiations." He spat, the word dripping with contempt. "The galaxy has had centuries to make amends for their betrayal. Now they will face the consequences of their actions." He turned his attention to the vast expanse of space before them, where the fleet of the Galactic Council loomed, their vessels gleaming with the latest in technological advancements. In Karen's eyes, they were nothing more than a fleeting obstacle, a speed bump on the path to humanity's rightful dominance. "Launch the attack," Karen commanded, his voice devoid of any trace of emotion. "Let the stars burn." Aboard the Astrin flagship, the matriarch, Lyrassa, watched the unfolding events with a heavy heart. She had spent her lifetime working to forge bonds of cooperation and understanding between the various species of the Galactic Council, and now it seemed that all of her efforts were about to be reduced to ashes. "The progenitor fleet has initiated their attack," a young officer reported, his voice trembling. "Our outposts are sustaining heavy damage, and our forces are struggling to mount an effective counteroffensive." Lyraisa closed her eyes, her delicate features etched with worry. "Mobilize all available ships," she said, her voice calm and measured. "We must buy time for the envoy to reach the humans and prevent this conflict from escalating further." The officer hesitated, his expression one of concern. "Matriarch, are you certain that diplomacy is the answer? The humans have made their demands clear, and they seem unwilling to compromise." Lyraisa opened her eyes, her gaze resolute. "We must try for the sake of our civilization. If we fail to find a peaceful solution, then all will be lost." The officer nodded, his doubts not fully assuaged, but he knew better than to question the wisdom of the Astrin matriarch. Relaying the orders, he watched as the Galactic Council's forces scrambled to confront the onslaught of the progenitor fleet, a desperate gambit to stave off the impending doom that threatened to engulf them all. The skies burned as the progenitor fleet unleashed the full might of its arsenal upon the Galactic Council's outposts. Brilliant flashes of energy lanced out, obliterating enemy vessels with ease, leaving the defenders stunned and overwhelmed. Admiral Karen watched the unfolding battle with a grim sense of satisfaction. His ancient ships, forged in the crucible of countless wars, were more than a match for the sleek, modern vessels of the Galactic Council. As the Astrin and Sinner fleets rushed to reinforce the beleaguered outposts, the humans struck with ruthless precision, their tactics honed by generations of experience. "Sir, the enemy is attempting to regroup and mount a counteroffensive," the young officer at the helm reported, his voice tense. "Shall we increase the intensity of the bombardment?" Karen considered the request for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "No," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Hold our position. Let them come to us." The officer blinked, clearly taken aback by the order. "But, sir, if we maintain this defensive posture, we risk losing the initiative. Surely, a more aggressive approach." Karen raised a hand, silencing the younger man. "You have much to learn, child," he said, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "The Galactic Council believes they understand the nature of war, but they have grown soft, complacent in their technological superiority. They will come to us, and then they will witness the true power of humanity." As if on cue, the Galactic Council's forces surged forward, their ships bristling with advanced weaponry. The Astrin and Sinner vessels led the charge, their captains driven by a desperate need to protect their homeworlds from the human onslaught. Karen watched the approaching fleet, his expression unreadable. "Now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. In response, the progenitor fleet unleashed a barrage of fire, their weapons cutting swaths through the enemy formations. Shields flashed and buckled under the relentless assault, and one by one, the Galactic Council's vessels succumbed to the human onslaught. Aboard the Astrin flagship, Matriarch Lyraisa watched the battle with growing horror. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her luminous eyes wide with disbelief. "Their weapons, their tactics, they are unlike anything we've ever encountered." The young officer beside her swallowed hard, his face pale. "We're losing ships faster than we can replace them, Matriarch. If this continues, we won't be able to hold them back for much longer." Lyraisa's gaze hardened, her resolve steeling. "Then we must find another way." Turning to the comm officer, she issued a terse order. "Contact the Gracier. Tell him we require his envoy with the utmost haste." Aboard the progenitor fleet's flagship, Admiral Karen observed the unfolding battle with a sense of grim satisfaction. The Galactic Council's forces were crumbling under the relentless onslaught of his ancient ships, their advanced technologies proving little more than a nuisance against the sheer power and resilience of humanity's might. "Sir, the enemy is retreating," the young officer at the helm reported, a note of triumph in his voice. "Shall we pursue them?" Karen considered the request for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "No," he said finally. "Let them go. We have made our point." The officer blinked, his expression one of confusion. "But sir, if we allow them to regroup, they may pose an even greater threat in the future." Karen's gaze hardened, his eyes narrowing. "The time for diplomacy has passed, child. Now, they know the true cost of betraying humanity." He paused, his weathered features softening slightly. "Besides, we have more pressing matters to attend to." The officer's brow furrowed. "Sir." "The Gracier," Karen said, his voice low and contemplative. "He will no doubt send an envoy to parley with us. We must be ready to receive them." The young officer's eyes widened with realization. You want them to come." Karen nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Indeed, for if there is still a chance to avoid a war that will consume the galaxy, it lies with the Gracier's chosen emissary." The officer hesitated, his gaze uncertain. "But, sir, if we show any weakness, any sign of compromise, the Galactic Council may view it as an opportunity to strike back with full force." Karen's expression hardened once more. "Then they will learn the true cost of such a foolish endeavor." He turned his gaze back towards the retreating Galactic Council forces, his voice laced with a hint of regret. "Humanity has already sacrificed too much. I will not allow our legacy to be extinguished, not while there is still a chance to reclaim our rightful place in the stars." Aboard the Gracier's personal shuttle, the aged diplomat sat in contemplative silence, his wrinkled features etched with a mixture of concern and determination. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he knew that the success or failure of his mission would have far-reaching consequences. "We are approaching the coordinates of the progenitor fleet, Gracier," the pilot reported, his voice laced with a hint of trepidation. "Are you certain this is the wisest course of action? The humans have already demonstrated their willingness to use overwhelming force." The Gracier turned his milky eyes towards the pilot, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I am certain, my friend, the path to peace is often the most perilous, but it is one that we must walk, no matter the cost." The pilot hesitated, his brow furrowed. "And what if they refuse to listen? What if they are intent on the destruction of our civilization?" The Gracier's expression darkened momentarily, a fleeting glimpse of the weight that he carried. "Then we must be prepared to make the most difficult of decisions." He paused, his gaze fixed on the looming presence of the progenitor fleet. "But I believe that there is still a chance for redemption, if we are willing to hear their story and understand the depths of their grievances." With a deep breath, the Gracier rose from his seat, his weathered frame belying the steel in his resolve. "Prepare for landing. It is time to face the wrath of humanity, and to uncover the truth that lies at the heart of this conflict." The Gracier's shuttle glided effortlessly through the void, its sleek design a testament to the technological prowess of the Galactic Council. Yet, as it approached the hulking silhouettes of the progenitor fleet, the aged diplomat could not help but feel a sense of trepidation. "We're being hailed, Gracier," the pilot announced, his voice tinged with a hint of nervousness. The Gracier nodded, his weathered features betraying no outward sign of his inner turmoil. "Open a channel. It is time to face the wrath of humanity." The cabin of the shuttle filled with the deep, rumbling voice of Admiral Karen, the leader of the progenitor fleet. "Greetings, Gracier. I must admit, I did not expect you to be the one to answer my call for surrender." The Gracier's lips curved into a faint smile. "Surrender was never my intention, Admiral Karen. I have come to seek understanding, to uncover the truth that lies at the heart of this conflict." There was a brief pause, and the Gracier could almost sense the weight of Karen's gaze upon him. "You have a remarkable gift for diplomacy, Gracier," the Admiral said, his tone laced with a hint of respect. "But I fear that the time for words has passed. The galaxy has turned its back on humanity for far too long, and now they must face the consequences of their betrayal." The Gracier nodded solemnly. I understand your grievances, Admiral. The history of our peoples is a tumultuous one, filled with missteps and missed opportunities. But I implore you, do not let the sins of the past blind you to the possibility of a better future. Karen's response was laced with a mixture of contempt and resignation. The Galactic Council has had centuries to make amends, Gracier. They have chosen to ignore our pleas, to dismiss us as little more than primitives. Now they will bear witness to the true power of humanity. The Gracier's expression hardened, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. Then let us work together to forge a new path, one that does not lead to the destruction of our entire civilization. Surely there must be a way to reconcile our differences and find a lasting peace. Silence hung in the air for a moment, and the Gracier could almost feel the weight of Karen's decision pressing down upon him. Finally, the Admiral spoke, his voice low and contemplative. Very well, Gracier, I will grant you an audience. But understand this, my patience is not endless. If you fail to convince me that there is still hope for a peaceful resolution, then I will have no choice but to continue our march towards victory, no matter the cost. The Gracier's shoulders sagged with relief, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. I understand, Admiral. I will not waste this opportunity. As the channel closed, the Gracier turned to the pilot, his expression grave. Set a course for the progenitor fleet's flagship. The fate of the galaxy now rests upon my shoulders. Aboard the Astran flagship, Matriarch Lyra watched the unfolding events with a mixture of trepidation and hope. The Gracier's decision to parley with the humans had been a bold one, and she could only pray that he would be successful in his endeavor. The progenitor fleet has not resumed their attack, a young officer reported, his voice tinged with a hint of confusion. They appear to be holding their position, waiting for the Gracier's shuttle to dock. Lyra nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. Then we must be prepared to seize this opportunity. If the Gracier can sway the humans towards a peaceful resolution, it may be our only chance to avoid total war. The officer hesitated, his expression uncertain. But Matriarch, what if the Gracier fails? What if the humans refuse to back down? Lyra's gaze hardened, her voice resolute. Then we must be prepared to make the most difficult of decisions. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the bridge of the flagship. Recall all available ships to our position. We must be ready to mount a coordinated counteroffensive should the need arise. The officer's eyes widened, a flicker of alarm crossing his features. Matriarch, are you suggesting that we? Lyra raised a hand, silencing him. I do not wish to resort to such drastic measures, but we must be prepared to defend our civilization at all costs. Her expression softened momentarily, a hint of regret in her voice. I only pray that it does not come to that. As the officer relayed the orders, Lyra turned her gaze towards the distant silhouette of the progenitor fleet, her heart heavy with the weight of the decisions that lay ahead. Aboard the flagship of the progenitor fleet, Admiral Karen watched the approach of the Gracier's shuttle with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The aged diplomat represented a last chance for peace, a glimmer of hope in the face of an ever-darkening future. The Gracier's shuttle is requesting permission to dock, sir, the young officer at the helm reported, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. Karen nodded, his weathered features set in a mask of impassivity. Grant them access. Let us see what the Gracier has to offer. As the shuttle settled into the docking bay, Karen made his way towards the airlock, his stride confident and unwavering. He knew that the fate of his people, the very future of humanity, hung in the balance. Failure was not an option. The airlock hissed open, and the Gracier emerged, his aged frame belying the steadfastness that shone in his eyes. Karen stepped forward, his hand outstretched in a gesture of greeting. Welcome, Gracier. I must admit, I am surprised by your decision to parley with us. The Gracier grasped Karen's hand, his grip firm and resolute. Then you underestimate the depth of my desire to forge a lasting peace, Admiral. The galaxy has teetered on the brink of annihilation for far too long. Karen's expression darkened, a flicker of rage flashing in his eyes. And who is to blame for that, Gracier? The Galactic Council has turned its back on humanity for centuries, dismissing us as nothing more than primitives. Now, they will face the consequences of their arrogance. The Gracier's brow furrowed, a hint of sorrow in his voice. I do not deny the sins of the past, Admiral. But I implore you, do not let the weight of history blind you to the possibility of a better future. Karen's jaw tightened, his grip on the Gracier's hand tightening ever so slightly. And what future is that, Gracier? One where humanity is forced to kowtow to the whims of the Galactic Council, where our rightful place in the stars is denied to us once more. The Gracier held Karen's gaze, his own expression unwavering. A future where humanity and the Galactic Council stand as equals, united in the pursuit of a common purpose. A future where the wounds of the past are healed, and the galaxy is forged anew. For a moment, the tension in the air was palpable, the weight of centuries of resentment and betrayal hanging between the two men. Then, slowly, Karen's grip on the Gracier's hand loosened, and a flicker of hope ignited in the Admiral's eyes. Very well, Gracier. I will hear you out. But understand this, if your words ring hollow, if I sense even the slightest hint of deception, then all bets are off. The Gracier nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I would expect nothing less. Admiral, let us begin. Within the war room of the Astran flagship, Matriarch Lyrassa paced back and forth, her thoughts consumed by the events unfolding in the distance. The Gracier's gambit had bought them precious time, but she knew that it was only a temporary respite. The progenitor fleet has not resumed its attack, a young officer reported, his voice tinged with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. They appear to be engaged in negotiations with the Gracier's shuttle. Lyrassa paused, her gaze fixed on the holo-projections that displayed the current positions of the warring fleets and the Galactic Council forces. The officer's expression darkened. They are still in a defensive posture, awaiting further orders. Several of the outlying systems have sustained significant damage, and our casualties are mounting. Lyrassa's lips pressed into a thin line, her brow furrowed in deep contemplation. We cannot afford to remain idle much longer, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The progenitor fleet's weapons have proven to be far more devastating than we anticipated. If the Gracier's negotiations fail, we may have no choice but to resort to desperate measures. The officer's eyes widened, a flicker of alarm crossing his features. Matriarch, you can't be suggesting that we... Lyrassa raised a hand, silencing him. I do not relish the thought, but the survival of our civilization may depend upon it. She turned her gaze towards the holo-projections, her expression etched with a mixture of determination and dread. Prepare the contingency plans. If the Gracier cannot sway the humans, we may be forced to unleash our most devastating weapons. The officer hesitated, his brow furrowed in concern. But Matriarch, the consequences of such an action... I am well aware of the risks, Lyrassa interjected, her voice sharp. But we must be prepared to do whatever it takes to protect our people, even if it means committing the unthinkable. The officer nodded, his expression somber. It will be done, Matriarch. As the officer relayed the orders, Lyrassa turned her gaze back towards the distant silhouette of the progenitor fleet, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision that lay ahead. Aboard the progenitor fleet's flagship, the Gracier and Admiral Karen sat across from each other, their gazes locked in a silent battle of wills. The air was thick with tension, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. You speak of a future where humanity and the Galactic Council stand as equals, Karen said, his voice low and contemplative. And yet, for centuries, we have been dismissed, our pleas for recognition and inclusion falling on deaf ears. The Gracier nodded solemnly. I do not deny the wrongs of the past, Admiral. The Galactic Council has made grievous errors in its treatment of humanity, and for that, they must be held accountable. Karen's jaw tightened, his gaze unwavering. And how precisely? Do you propose to hold them accountable? With empty promises and hollow gestures, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. No, Gracier. The time for such empty platitudes has long since passed. The galaxy will burn, and humanity will rise from the ashes, reclaiming our rightful place among the stars. The Gracier held Karen's gaze, his expression calm and resolute. I understand your desire for vengeance, Admiral, but I implore you to see beyond the confines of your own anger. The path you have chosen, one of destruction and conquest, will only lead to more suffering, more loss. Karen's expression darkened, a flicker of rage flashing in his eyes. And what would you have me do, Gracier? Sit idly by while the Galactic Council continues to marginalize us, to deny us the recognition and respect we deserve? No, the Gracier replied, his voice firm. I would have you work with us, to forge a new and lasting peace, a peace built on mutual understanding, on a shared vision for the future of the galaxy. Karen scoffed, his contempt evident in his tone. The Galactic Council has had centuries to prove their good faith, Gracier, and they have failed at every turn. Why should I trust them now? The Gracier leaned forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. Because the alternative is the destruction of everything we hold dear. The war you have started will consume us all, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the weight of their words hanging heavily in the air. Then, ever so slightly, Karen's expression softened, a glimmer of uncertainty flickering in his eyes. You speak of a future where humanity is recognized for our contributions, where we are treated as equals among the stars. The Admiral said, his voice barely above a whisper. A future where the sins of the past are finally atoned for. The Gracier nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Yes, Admiral, that is the future I envision. One where the galaxy stands united, its peoples working together to build a better tomorrow. Karen's gaze turned inward, his brow furrowed in deep contemplation. And you believe this is truly possible? That the Galactic Council will set aside their prejudices and embrace us as partners, rather than mere subjects? The Gracier's expression hardened, a note of urgency in his voice. It is the only path forward, Admiral, if we are to avoid the utter devastation of our civilizations. The choice is yours. Will you continue down the road of war and destruction, or will you join us in forging a new era of peace and cooperation? The tension in the air was palpable as Karen considered the Gracier's words, his gaze fixed on the holo-projections that displayed the ongoing battle between the progenitor fleet and the Galactic Council's forces. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the decision he made in this moment would echo through the ages. The air in the war room of the Astran flagship was thick with tension as Matriarch Lyrassa and her advisors watched the holo-projections with bated breath. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the decision to unleash their most devastating weapons weighed heavily upon them. The progenitor fleet has not resumed its attack, a young officer reported, his voice betraying a hint of both relief and uncertainty. The Gracier's shuttle remains docked with their flagship, and there are no signs of hostility. Lyrassa nodded, her expression pensive. Then there is still a chance for a peaceful resolution. She turned to the officer, her gaze steely. But we must be prepared for the worst. Have the contingency plans ready, just in case the Gracier's negotiations fail. The officer hesitated, his brow furrowed with concern. Matriarch, are you certain that such a drastic course of action is warranted? The consequences of using those weapons. Lyrassa raised a hand, silencing him. I am painfully aware of the risks, but the survival of our civilization is at stake. Her gaze softened momentarily. Believe me, I take no joy in this, but we must be willing to make the most difficult of choices if we are to prevail. The officer nodded, his expression grim, and set about relaying the orders to the rest of the fleet. Aboard the progenitor fleet's flagship, Admiral Karen sat in contemplative silence, his weathered features etched with a mixture of doubt and resolve. The Gracier's words had struck a chord deep within him, stirring memories of a time long forgotten, when humanity had stood tall among the stars, respected and revered. You speak of a future where humanity is recognized for our contributions, Karen said, his voice low and pensive. A future where we are treated as equals, our rightful place among the galactic order restored. The Gracier nodded, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. Yes, Admiral. That is the future I envision, one where the sins of the past are finally atoned for, where humanity and the Galactic Council stand side by side, united in the pursuit of a greater purpose. Karen's gaze shifted to the holo-projections that displayed the ongoing battle, the devastation wrought by his ancient fleet weighing heavily upon him. And you believe the Galactic Council is capable of such a transformation, that they can truly set aside their prejudices and accept us as partners rather than mere subjects. The Gracier's expression hardened, a note of urgency in his voice. They must, Admiral, for the alternative is unthinkable. The war you have begun will consume us all, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. Karen's jaw tightened, the weight of his decision pressing down upon him. Then the choice before me is clear: continue down the path of destruction, or trust in the possibility of a lasting peace. He turned his gaze back to the Gracier, his eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope. And you believe this peace is truly attainable? The Gracier nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It is, Admiral, but only if you are willing to take that first step, to set aside your thirst for vengeance and embrace the possibility of a better future. Karen's expression darkened, a flicker of uncertainty passing through his eyes. And what assurances do I have that the Galactic Council will uphold their end of the bargain? That they will not simply betray us once more, as they have done in the past? The Gracier's gaze hardened, his voice laced with a hint of steel. You have my word, Admiral, and the word of the Galactic Council. We will work tirelessly to forge a new era of cooperation and mutual respect, where the mistakes of the past are never repeated. Karen considered the Gracier's words, his mind racing with the implications of the decision that lay before him. On one hand, the allure of vengeance, of reclaiming humanity's rightful place among the stars, was a siren's call that he had long resisted. On the other, the promise of a lasting peace, a future where his people could thrive without the constant specter of war, was a temptation he could not ignore. Very well, Gracier, Karen said, his voice tinged with a hint of resignation. I will heed your words and give this peace a chance. He paused, his gaze hardening. But understand this: if the Galactic Council fails to uphold their end of the bargain, if they betray us once more, then all bets are off. The stars will burn, and humanity will rise from the ashes, unstoppable and unforgiving. The Gracier's lips curved into a faint smile, a glimmer of hope shining in his eyes. I understand, Admiral, and I give you my solemn promise that the Galactic Council will not falter in its commitment to this new era of cooperation. With a nod, Karen turned to the young officer who stood quietly by, his expression one of cautious optimism. Inform the fleet to stand down. The war is over. As the officer rushed to relay the orders, the Gracier let out a quiet sigh of relief, his shoulders sagging with the weight of the burden he had carried. The path ahead would be long and arduous, fraught with challenges and potential setbacks, but he knew that the fate of the galaxy now rested upon his ability to forge a lasting peace between humanity and the Galactic Council. In the war room of the Astran flagship, Matriarch Lyra watched the holo-projections with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The progenitor fleet had ceased its attack, and the Gracier's shuttle remained docked with their flagship, a testament to the success of his diplomatic mission. The progenitor fleet has stood down, Matriarch, a young officer reported, his voice tinged with a hint of disbelief. They have accepted the Gracier's offer of peace. Lyra nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Then let us pray that this peace lasts, for the sake of all our civilizations. The officer hesitated, his expression uncertain. But, Matriarch, what of the contingency plans? Shall we still prepare to? Lyressa raised a hand, silencing him. No. The time for such drastic measures has passed. We must now focus our efforts on rebuilding the trust and cooperation that has been so sorely lacking in the past. The officer nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. And the Galactic Council? How will they respond to this news? Lyressa's expression hardened, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. They will have no choice but to accept it. The alternative is the utter destruction of everything we have built. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled officers. From this day forward, we must work tirelessly to forge a new era of peace and understanding, one where humanity and the Galactic Council stand as equals, united in the pursuit of a brighter future. As the officers set about their tasks, Lyressa turned her attention back to the holo-projections, a glimmer of hope in her heart. The path ahead would be long and arduous, but she knew that with the Gracier's guidance and the unwavering determination of humanity, they could overcome even the darkest of challenges and build a galaxy where all could thrive.